Hello everyone, it is I, YouTuber, and in today's video we'll be predicting or trying to guess the winner of the next matchup as compared to the Death Battle, Blade versus Buffy. So, let's begin. So, in terms of sources I'm going to use, because I know very little about Marvel Comics and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I will be using a blog that does exist on this matchup, and will be using it to get a basic idea on stats and the general abilities that these two have. As such, I will be linking this blog in the description and in the pinned comment. So if you want to read it for yourself, feel free to go ahead. And yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say. Let's begin with strength. Now this is going to be a bit different to how I did it with my Ruby vs. Buffy prediction, where I already completed the chart. But that was in an earlier take, and that took around 10 minutes, which was not good for me, because 10 minutes is too little time to explain my reasonings as to why a character would want here. So I will be doing it a bit differently, and you will see how in a second. First, we're going to start with strength, which I think goes to Blade. Without using cross-scaling, Blade gets into kilotons of TNT, whereas Buffy on her own gets around tons of TNT. This is really bad for Buffy because kilotons is more than tons. As a result, I am giving this spot to Blade simply on that merit alone. If you include stuff like cross-scaling, there is a bit more you can work with. However, Blade should still edge out in that regard, which is why I'm giving it to him. Again, there's a lot of pieces that explain why Blade does get here, mainly featuring stuff like Wolverine and other Marvel characters, as well as other stuff that we'll get to later with Speed. However, besides that, Buffy simply should just not take the Speed. Actually, yeah, I was gonna say strength, but yeah, she doesn't take Speed either. That's on me. Now, the main thing with Speed, in terms of Buffy and Blade, is whose bastard-like arguments applies better, and that is really simple. Buffy's bastard-like arguments are not shown to be actually faster than light. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there is a lot of characters who use attacks that are similar to lasers, but not exactly lasers in a sense. Like, let me explain. See, lasers have speeds about them. However, the attacks shown in Buffy that would normally get the character faster than light do not have the same properties as lasers, such as exploding upon impact and just generally just not being a bright laser that can just slice through someone. As a result, that means that Buffy's faster than light scaling is off the charts. However, in terms of Blade, being on his own is actually kinda slow, as the fastest that Blade has ever gone, in general, is Mach 1. She's fast enough to dodge attacks that dodge redirected lightning, as well as Bane, another character in the series. This is shown with Daredevil, or other street tiers. Blade's skill to other street tiers has been super consistent as he's kept up with the likes of Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Falcon, and Black Panther. And you can see from other characters who are slower than him, that he's basically faster than the likes of Daredevil, who is capable of perceiving and reacting in a nanosecond, which is grateful created to 5.6 C. Do you know what that means? No, I absolutely do not. Which, as a result, would make Blade faster if you included chain skill. But if you didn't, Buffy would be faster, but at the same time, since the chain skill does seem viable for Blade, that, as a result, would net him the stat. Now, finally, is durability. Thankfully, this one is pretty easy to explain, and that is going to Blade. This is for one simple reason. Both Blade and Buffy have very good healing factors, which helps them heal from attacks if they were ever to get injured. However, the reason why Blade gets this, and this is not a tie, is because Blade's healing factor is a lot more potent and stronger than Buffy's healing factor. Let's look into this a bit more with this blog. You can ignore getting impaled or having his face slashed, and also he was tortured for a ritual, like actually tortured, like 8 pints of blood gone, still broke out, healed in moments, and kicked the ass of people in the building, including his torturers, which by default would get him a really good healing factor. However, let's look into Buffy's healing factors. Apparently, Buffy's healing factor is similar to the likes of Wolverine. The only problem, though, is that what Buffy has survived with her healing factor is a lot less powerful than what Blade has survived with his healing factor. As a result, I'm giving this to Blade simply because he's just survived a lot more crazy stuff as opposed to Buffy. Now next up is skill. Finally, for once, Buffy's actually on this tier. That was like this though, it's a tie. So basically, both of these characters are very skilled in terms of their vampire hunting expertise. More specifically, let's talk about Blade real quick. Blade is extremely skilled as a vampire hunter, being able to kill vampires before they can even react, which is a very big feat. Vampires in usual media are typically shown as to be well above humans in terms of their physical capabilities, including speed. As we can see, being able to surpass a vampire's speed is a very good skill to have. However, let's not ignore Buffy's speed or skill. This is what I get for talking too fast. Buffy has gone against multiple threats that would put the planet and even the whole universe at risk. Now, this doesn't say that she's by the default universal. Granted, I'm not fully certain on that. I mean, again, I haven't seen anything from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm mainly just going off of what I know from the debates. However, from what I've seen in terms of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, in terms of the blog and what I've heard, she's gone against multiple events that would have basically just fucked over the entire world. And you need a lot of skill to do that, which is why I'm giving the time to Blade. Unfortunately, there's some experience which goes to Blade by default. For context, Blade physically is around 30 to 40 years old. He was born in London, 1929. However, in terms of age, as we know, like, not like physically, but like when he's alive right now, let's pretend he's alive in 2025 just to be safe. He would be around 96 years old. So basically, and since he's physically around 30 to 40, we can realistically say, let's just say we'll go 35 just to be completely safe. He would have 61, I believe, 61? I'll correct my math if I'm wrong, I can't do math that in my head. He would have that many years behind the belt when it comes to vampire hunting. Compare this to Buffy, who at the start of season 1 of the show was around teenage years, but at the end of the show she was around 22. What I know, the show was around 7 years of aging up, so it would be 61 years of experience to 7 years of experience. I don't think I need a mathematician to tell you that 7 is a lot smaller than 61. And even then, if we use 40, like the bare, 40, the bare minimum for Blade, that would make it around 56 or 55, either or, give or take. So yeah, bare minimum. Blade is just taking experience any day of the week, and it's not even close. However, intelligence does go to both of them. Both of them have shown to be against multiple threats that would have their intelligence in a bind. So I'm just going to talk about their weaknesses. So, weakness-wise, both have an extremely similar weakness in terms of their general confidence, rather in different ways. Blade is confident in terms of arrogance, whereas Buffy is confident in terms of being a lone wolf. This, as a result, gets them in pretty sticky situations. However, both of them do have another weakness of some kind. For example, Blade can have a weakness in terms of his senses being overloaded. However, Buffy has no way to exploit this weakness. Oh yeah, something about memory banks and dreams. What's she even need that? Next up is powers and hacks. Yeah, this goes to Blade. Simply put, they both have extremely similar abilities, like, as we mentioned earlier with the durability, they both have a healing factor. They both also have mind control manipulation. Well, mind control manipulation, no. Mind control resistance. I can't get it right! As a result, I would probably have to give this one to Blade simply because he just has a lot more powers and abilities for him to use that Buffy just does not have. That's something we're going to be seeing a lot. Buffy just has a lot less than what Blade has. A healing factor, Blade has it better. Mind control resistance, Blade also has that, along with more hacks, which is the exact reason that Blade is getting powers and hacks. And finally, weapons. This goes to Blade. This is for an extreme. There's 2 reasons for this. The first reason, Blade has a lot more weapons. Buffy does have a lot of weapons of her own, like a weapon chest, holy water, and general stuff like that. However, Blade just has a lot more weapons at his disposal, including stuff that could seal Buffy, or just turns to a vampire outright despite her being a slayer. So in general, Blade just has a lot more weapons for him to use as opposed to Buffy. However, the big reason that Blade wins weapons is simple. Buffy and Blade both have one-shot weapons. Buffy has a side called the something, I don't know if that's something. But this weapon could one-shot Blade. However, Blade has two one-shot weapons. The first is the breathing gun. For context, the breathing gun is an arch weapon of hell given to him by Diamond Hellstorm, the son of Satan. The breathing gun is basically, it works on demonic entities, which includes basically demons and, shit like that. Slayers are born of a black magic ritual, which is stated to be evil in terms of origin. Several sources of the Slayers' history have shown that their powers are based on demonic energy, meaning it's logical to assume that by this logic, that demonic influence is a factor to their powers, as well as explaining a lot of their general abilities, like possibly their healing factor. Which by that point would make it fair ground for the breathing gun to work on Buffy, which means that the breathing gun would basically just one-shot Buffy by that point. And second of all is Blade's adamantium sword. In the previous episode of Death Battle, Raiden vs. Wolverine, we know just how strong adamantium is, being near unbreakable. Now, granted, you could break the adamantium sword if you have a weapon that does so, like in Raiden vs. Wolverine, we know that a weapon that can disrupt molecular bonds could destroy adamantium. However, guess who doesn't have a weapon that does that? That's right, Buffy. Buffy does not have a way to bypass such a metal, which by default would mean that not only does she have less of a general arsenal, but she has less options to one-shot Blade. So, that's a massive no on that one. However, here's an even worse part. A lot of Buffy's general arsenal works on vampires. Blade is half vampire, but not a full vampire. Blade is a drampire. Or damper. I don't know how you pronounce that either. Which means that a lot of Buffy's general arsenal doesn't even work on Blade. By that metric, that means that not only does Blade have a lot more insta-kill potential, but he just has a lot more arsenal that would even work on Buffy. A lot of Buffy's arsenal would not work on Blade, and she has less one-shot capabilities thanks to Blade just having more one-shot potential. Which, as a result, Blade wins with honestly no difficulty whatsoever, I think. Blade in general has shown to have a lot more stuff going for him, and what Buffy has, Blade just also has in spades. Like, for example, intelligence, they both have similar weaknesses, and in terms of skill, both are very skilled in their vampire hunting. However, Blade has shown to be also just as skilled. And in terms of the stat trinity, Blade's just done a lot more crazy stuff and has a lot more capability to scale to characters with a lot more stuff than Buffy does. And in terms of weapons, a lot of Buffy's basic weapons don't affect Blade, whereas Blade has a lot more options to one-shot than just Buffy's side. As a result, there is no difficulty whatsoever. Strength, kilotons versus tons of TNT. By that point, kilotons is stronger, so Blade gets strength. Speed, Blade on their own, Buffy will take speed, thanks to being in like Mach 60s. However, Blade is able to scale to characters who are able to go at 6.6 speed in the form of Daredevil, and should be stronger than other street tiers in Marvel. Durability, both have a healing factor. However, Blade's healing factor is just a lot more better than Buffy's. Skill, both of them are skilled in vampire slaying. However, experience goes to Blade for being a lot older. 7 years versus bare minimum 50 years. Intelligence goes to both. They're both very smart in what they do, and have an extremely similar weakness in terms of their confidence. Granted, they're both different in that regard. However, it's still weakness in competence. Powers and Axe goes to Blade, simply put, he has a lot more powers than Buffy, and what Buffy has, Blade also has, like mind control, resistance, and a healing factor. And weapons goes to Blade, he has a lot more that He has a lot more weapons than Buffy, has more heat, has more insta-kill weapons than Buffy, and a lot of Buffy's basic weapons won't even affect Blade, thanks to him being half vampire. As a result, the official winner of this matchup, at least in my opinion, would go to Blade with no difficulty whatsoever, as he basically just outshined Buffy in every single way. So yeah, I hope that gave my thoughts off well. If you want to explain your reasonings, let me know down in the comments below. Again, I know very little about these characters, so I would be very interested in hearing what you guys have to think about this matchup. Well, that'll be all from me today. I have uni to go to soon enough, so I'll see you all next time. Bye bye for now.